So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you everyone for joining us. Congressman Jamie Raskin proudly represents Maryland's 8th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, a professor of constitutional law and a father. Representative Raskin led as an impeachment manager in the second impeachment trial and served on the select committee to investigate January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. We are very honored to have read Congressman Raskin's book and that he's able to join the Open Democracy Book Club tonight to share a few thoughts and take some questions.
Hello, is it my turn?
It is your turn.
Let's see. I wish I could see everybody out there. Hello, everybody. Hello, New Hampshire.
Hi.
All the beautiful people. Well, thank you for having me. It's very meaningful to me to have everybody reading my book or listening to my book. It recaptures that the very dark and despondent and extraordinary period, which in my life encapsulated the loss of our beautiful son, Tommy Raskin, on the last day of 2020. Then we had his burial service, a COVID-19 service, so it was only family members allowed to go on January the 5th. The next day was January the 6th. And despite a lot of people in my family urging me not to go in, I felt that I had to go in because we were down a lot of people because of COVID, and we had a very slender margin. And I was also tasked by Nancy Pelosi several weeks before with getting ready for the anticipated objections to Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, that were coming in from the Republicans. And so I just felt that I had to be there. So our youngest daughter, Tabitha, came with me. My son-in-law, who's married to our oldest daughter, Hannah, his name is Hank, he came also that day to be with me. And so they were there, and then they were caught up in all the insurrectionary chaos and violence, as you know, from the book. And then we started working on impeachment papers immediately. I also started working on a 25th Amendment resolution to call upon Vice President Pence to convene the cabinet for the purposes of transferring the president's power to the vice president on the theory that the president could not discharge the powers and duties of office. Pence rejected that, but we did vote to impeach. 10 House Republicans joined all the Democrats. Then, Speaker Pelosi asked me to lead the team of impeachment managers over in the Senate. And so then we had a few weeks to get ready. I talk in the book about how she kind of threw me a lifeline, Nancy Pelosi, because I was drowning in grief and sorrow and darkness at that point. And she basically was saying, we need you, and we need you to rally, and we need you to lead this effort. And so for that, I will always be grateful to her, because I don't know what might have happened. I mean, I felt uncertain that I would ever be able to do anything of value again in my life. And I felt Tommy very much with me in my heart and in my mind during that period. And so then, and then the rest of the book, I tell the story of how we got ready for the impeachment trial and everything that happened, and a lot of the strategic decisions we were making. So it's basically a 50-day period. And as I look back on it now, I wrote it pretty much immediately after, because I was, suffering insomnia and I wasn't sleeping, and I figured, well, this was an opportunity to try to write down everything that had happened so I wouldn't lose it, but also to collect everything I could on Tommy and write everything about him that I could, and just pour my heart out about our extraordinary son. And then, yeah, so I wrote that, and as I look back on it now, there's certain things I see not differently, but I suppose in different proportions. I mean, and I don't know how much this came through, but when I look back on it now, I see so much COVID-19 and that plague and the spectacular dysfunction of the federal government and Trump's lethal recklessness in dealing with it as setting the stage for, Tommy's depression, which was clinical, but um, becoming more and more dire as he, like so many young people in his generation, was um, isolated and despondent and cut off. And a whole generation of young people were basically separated from the natural sociability of school and work and relationships. And for somebody already struggling with depression, as Tommy was, it was just an overwhelming and ultimately insufferable situation. So he was a second-year student at Harvard Law School when we lost him, and he had been home he had come back in the fall of 2019, and then had been with us living at home in 2020 when we lost him at the end of the year, a grim, dark year. So, when I first set out to write the book, I wasn't really certain kind of the connection of all these things, but I suppose the book really tells the story of this connection of that darkness around COVID-19, when we pretty much almost became a failed state. A failed state, the political scientists say, is one that can't deliver the basic goods of existence to the people. And I think when it came to public health, we had broken down and we were acting like a failed state. And of course, it was also a period when we were all very upset about George Floyd and the issues that were being promoted by Black Lives Matter. And then Trump's determination to stay in office and to overthrow the election through coup-like moves and then through a violent insurrection finally, I think completed that sense of us living in a failed state and democracy under absolute siege. So anyway, maybe I'll just advance those as a few of my preliminary thoughts about it. I do think that there was a lot of valor and a lot of courage, a lot of defiance that was mobilized by the police officers, Sergeant Cannell and Officer Dunn and Officer Fanone and Officer Hodges, and all of these cops who've become my good friends, as well as the leadership, the staff people, the Senate staffers who picked up the lavender boxes that the Electoral College votes were in, and everybody who hung tough and stood strong, and we all went back in and we voted. And so I wish I could say that these days were over, but they're not over. I mean, we're still in the middle of this crisis, and we're in the fight of our lives, as you guys know, in New Hampshire. And I guess I'll close on this thought that if Mitch McConnell had done the right thing, then we could be in a very different place as a country right now. We did end up in the Senate with the most sweeping bipartisan vote in a presidential impeachment trial in American history, 57-43. And I had to explain to the foreign press why that wasn't a win, because of course we needed the 2/3 majority. We needed 67 votes. We needed 10 more votes. And McConnell indicated through his body language and his facial expressions and from things he was saying to me during the breaks and so on, that he was utterly shocked and appalled by what Trump had done. I was really convinced he was going to vote with us, and being convinced of that, I thought he would bring not just a majority, but maybe all of the Republican senators over. I mean, I really thought that this was their opportunity finally to make a break from Trump, because if they all voted to convict and to disqualify him, it would be over. But they demonstrated a lot of spinelessness and cowardice. When the vote was over, and I was crestfallen, McConnell got up and made that speech, and he said, well, the House managers have, made their case, and Donald Trump is morally, ethically, actually responsible for everything that happened. But he said, we did not have jurisdiction to try a former president of the United States. And you may recall that was an issue that we dealt with as a motion to dismiss on jurisdictional grounds on the very first day of the trial, and the Senate rejected that in a vote of 56-44. The Senate rejected that idea, which cut against 2 centuries of clear Senate precedents where judges who had left office or cabinet secretaries who had left office had been impeached by the House and tried in the Senate nonetheless. And yet he hung his hat on that claim. And because it had already been decided, of course, I think that this made the Senate's failure to convict the greatest case of jury nullification in American history, because it's like a criminal trial of someone on murder, and they move to exclude the weapon because they claim it was seized unlawfully. And if they lose on that point on Fourth Amendment grounds, at that point it can't be brought up again. Then the gun is just in evidence in the case. And so the jury is instructed by the judge, you are to disregard anybody's claim that the gun was illegally seized, because that's already been determined that it was lawfully seized and it's part of the case. And so what McConnell did was he said, I'm going to disregard the actual facts of the case, which I agree convict Trump. And 20 other Republican senators said the same thing. I'm going to disregard that and instead go back to a legal motion, which was settled against Trump on the very first day of the trial. So in any event, here we are. And now Donald Trump is running with 4 federal and state prosecutions, indictments against him all over the country, 91 different offenses. He has pardoned Michael Flynn, Dinesh D'Souza, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, a number of other political criminals who now form his inner political entourage. And he is out there promising, as you know, to pardon all of the January 6th hostages, or political prisoners, as he calls them, which is terrifying and dangerous. I mean, the 29 people who are in DC jail right now are in for violently assaulting Capitol Police officers or other federal officers or Metropolitan Police officers, breaking their jaws, their necks, their fingers, their toes, giving them a heart attack, a stroke, what have you. These people are not hostages who are people who've been illegally abducted by terrorist or criminal enterprises and then held for a financial or legal or political ransom. They're not hostages, and they're certainly not political prisoners. They are not Nelson Mandela, who spent decades in prison struggling for the end of apartheid. They are not Alexei Navalny, who just gave his life in the struggle for democracy in Russia against Putin. And it is filthy for Donald Trump and Elise Stefanik and these other Republicans to go out there and conflate these categories. So in any event, I want to tell you, if you haven't read it yet, my book does end on a positive note, on an optimistic note, and I feel very optimistic and very positive. And I've been to 18 states in the campaign so far, and we are getting huge Democratic energy, surge of volunteers and people who understand that democracy's on the line, freedom's on the ballot in this campaign. Nobody's falling for the nonsense. Nobody's falling for this third party thing, which I think will begin to shrink as it becomes clear that the Republicans are pumping it up. They're the ones behind it. And you can read the front page of the New York Times about that today. So there we are. The floor is open. And again, thank you for having me both in person in New Hampshire. It's wonderful going there with my friend Annie Custer and traveling around and campaigning for the Democrats. And I hope to come back again soon. And thank you all again for reading my book.
Yeah, so we've got some questions already coming through in the chat, but we're going to start with this first question. We're fighting for our democracy. What have been done on the to make sure that marginalized voices are heard and uplifted in our democracy?
Well, what a beautiful question that is. I mean, that's up to all of us, I suppose. I am proud to be in the party that champions people's freedom of expression and also does everything we can to advance the magnificent diversity of the country in our own ranks. There's a scene in the book actually where I'm seated with a right-wing Republican colleague who I serve with on the oversight and the judiciary committees, Clay Higgins from Louisiana. And I said to him, Clay, what do you see when you look out at the Congress, when you look at our side of the aisle and you look at your side of the aisle? And he said, you go first, you tell me. I said, I see the beautiful diversity of America on our side. I see African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, white people. I see the disabled. I see women and men. I see LGBTQ. I see America when I look at my side. And when I look over your side, I see like a 1950s parody of America. It's, like overwhelmingly white men. And I said, now you tell me what you see. He said, well, when I look over your side, I see the coasts. And when I look at my side, I see middle America. I see the heartland of the country. So, that there are definitely different views out there, and we got to try to hear people as much as possible of all political and ideological persuasions and so on. But I am proud to be in the party that has the first African American woman as vice president of the United States, that we have as our minority leader, soon to be Speaker of the House, our first African American person. Just generally, every time I sit down on our side of the aisle, I'm able to hear from Native American members. Of course, well, one of my Native American colleagues, Deb Haaland, became the Secretary of the Interior. So I think that all of that is part of the process, but we don't want to just think of it in representative terms. We want literally everybody's voice out here. And that's an important part of the message that I'm trying to bring out to the country, and especially to the young people who've had a great effect in moving the dialogue about what's taking place in Israel and Gaza. And I just tell them, you are having a major impact, and we want you to stay involved and stay engaged, because this is the party where your voice matters.
Another question. It seems like you really made your son so present and with love in the book. Will you speak a little bit more about your son's legacy?
Well, I feel weird because I mean, you never want to brag about your children, and I suppose the rule changes if the child's no longer with you, and but Tommy really was just a splendid human being, and he just had the most amazing heart. He had a perfect heart, and he was somebody who never gave up on anybody. He had extremely strong moral and political convictions, but he didn't advance them with any kind of moralistic or sanctimonious or holier than thou attitude. I mean, he was a vegan, for example, and if people asked him, well, why was he vegan? He had a number of poems that he had written about it, and he would answer them. He wrote, one of the beautiful ones is called Where War Begins, and it's about how people deaden ourselves to the meaning of violence through the consumption of animals and just like the massive slaughter of animals. And he tries to connect that to moral indifference to human suffering. But he never judged anybody or tried to make people feel bad. If you asked him, he would say, he'd, give you a little coupon that he would take you out for lunch or dinner or breakfast for vegan food and talk to you about it more. And he converted just dozens and dozens of people. We hear from people all the time who say that, after reading his poetry or his essays about this, that they, as difficult as it was or is, that they have, become vegetarian or become vegan. But Tommy was just a major champion of human rights and peace and strong democracy for everybody. And a lot of young people connect with him, and we get letters and emails and stuff from all over the country, all over the world, really, from people who talk about Tommy's legacy. And I couldn't even recount to you the dozens of different things that have been named after Tommy, like scholarships and animal shelters and you name it. And he was a great champion of the rights of animals and animal welfare. And I know that's an important part of his legacy, just like his strong advocacy for human rights for everybody.
Thank you. Terry Reeves' question is, what brings you joy these days?
Well, I got to say, I get a lot of joy from going around the country and connecting with Democrats and seeing people organize. And I see how the Republican Party is shrinking every day. Another Republican leaves Congress and says they can't take it anymore. Ken Buck, Mike Gallagher, they're leaving. They're leaving. I don't know if they're leaving the party. They're certainly leaving Congress, and they're leaving in a way that really sends a message. Like when Gallagher left, he had his resignation, I think, 2 days after the date upon which he would have had to resign in order for there to be a special election, but he waited for that to end. So that seat is going to be vacant. So there's not going to be a special election. And it's the same thing with Ken Buck. So, they're very angry about what's happening in the Republican Party, which is just getting more and more Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz every single day. In meantime, I'm seeing great growth and power in the Democratic Party. And, I'm seeing people's commitment to democracy and freedom. And, with Trump, of course, it's always about, what you can get out of it, right? I mean, for Trump, the government is just a money-making opportunity. And, he made millions and millions from foreign governments when he was in. When I talk about it publicly, Donald Trump Jr. gets up and says, my father didn't even take his salary when he was president. I'm sorry, but that's the only thing you're allowed to take. You can't say, well, I'm going to give up my salary from the US taxpayers and I'm going to be paid by Saudi Arabia instead, or the Chinese government. That defeats the whole design of the Constitution. But anyway, what I'm seeing when I go out is people who are motivated on our side because of their commitment to their communities, because of their commitment to women's rights, because of their commitment to diversity, to the rights of the LGBTQ community, to, making further progress in the country on civil rights, on infrastructure, on the whole thing. So that, I mean, it gives me joy just because I know we are in such a struggle right now. I do manage to spend some time out hiking, which is good for my peace of mind, you know, when we're clashing with MAGA all day long. And of course, being with my family and my friends.
The next question comes from Sandy. How has your loss impacted your political work, particularly with teens and young adults?
Well, you know, I've converted my campaign into basically a school. It's called Democracy Summer. The New Hampshire reps participate in Democracy Summer. We're in more than 40 states now. We've got hundreds of Democratic leaders who do it, but basically I spend no money on pollsters, TV, radio, consultants, any of that stuff. It goes into Democracy Summer, and we bring in high school and college kids, and we've set up a school. And so nationwide on Zoom, they hear from historians, from political scientists, from elected officials, from campaign strategists, you name it. And then they spend the rest of the week, when they're not in the national Zooms, in their campaign. So they'd be, you know, embedded in New Hampshire, like in, you know, Manchester or Nashville or whatever, doing canvassing, door knocking, digital organizing, voter registration, working with the campaigns. And of course, I know there's a campaign to replace Annie now. And so we're going to definitely have to have Democracy Summer on the ground as soon as that primary happens.
Arthur, I know you have your hand up. Did you want to?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I have a comment that
Okay.
I feel so tremendously energized by Congressman Raskin and his articulateness and what he's standing for and what I believe. You talk about the two coasts. I believe what you're standing for is something that 80% of the people in the United States really believe in terms of the fundamental interest in a democratic and responsive government. And if there were any way in which we could give you a greater voice, and it's not only you, but those set of ideas, they are absolutely powerful. And they represent, I believe, a great majority of the people in this United States, whether they're red or blue. The red or blue thing is something that's being imposed upon them, but the interest in the responsiveness of a government that's being fair and is rejecting cruelty is nationwide, and you're representing that point of view in a very effective way. Sorry for not asking a question.
Thank you, dear man, for your lovely words. That means a lot to me. And I am totally with you that I think that our party is representing the vast majority of the American people at this moment. Arthur, I completely agree with you. And what we're up against on the other side is just a bag of anti-democratic tricks, like gerrymandering of the federal and state districts, voter suppression tactics, manipulation of the electoral college, right-wing judicial activism, use of the filibuster to thwart the majority, all those things. And so we've just got to keep pressing forward. You know, Tocqueville said in Democracy in America that voting rights and democracy in our country are either shrinking and shriveling away, or they're growing and expanding. And we've got to get back on the growth track. And John Dewey said that the only solution to the ills of democracy is more democracy. And what we're suffering from today is not democracy, it's the obstacles to it, it's the obstructions to it. But I think that they have gone so far on an extreme that it's very clear who they represent. It's the autocrats in Moscow, it's the kleptocrats in Mar-a-Lago, the theocrats in MAGA and with Mike Johnson, and the plutocrats who are, you know, running the show just in order to get another big tax break for the wealthiest people. But who are they up against? They're up against the Democrats. And the Democrats are going to beat all of them, the kleptocrats and the plutocrats and the theocrats and the autocrats. And that's our historic mission. And the political scientists have told us what the characteristics of a fascist or an authoritarian political party are. One, they refuse to accept the results of democratic elections when they don't go their way. Two, they embrace political violence, or they refuse to disavow political violence as an instrument for obtaining and maintaining political power. Three, they're organized not on democratic principles, but as an authoritarian cult of personality around a charismatic or allegedly charismatic figure whose word and will and whim are all elevated above the rule of law and the Constitution of the United States or the Constitution of the country. And finally, they proceed rhetorically through scapegoating and demonization and racism and anti-Semitism and all of the monsters of the last century, which we thought we had put to bed. So, they got mad at Joe Biden when he said there's semi-fascist currents running through the GOP. But I'm sorry, if the shoe semi-fits, you semi-wear it, because that is what they've done to their party. And I take no joy in saying that. I've got the bust of one president in my office on my desk, Abraham Lincoln, which I inherited from my grandfather. And I love Lincoln, but they've taken his party of freedom and union and anti-conspiracy theory and anti-know-nothingism, and they've turned it into a cult. And I've told my GOP colleagues, when we get through this period and when we win back the government for democracy and freedom across the board, they are going to be fit only for selling flowers and incense at Dulles Airport, because they have suspended critical thinking skills and they're acting like members of a religious cult who sleep on the basement floor.
Oh, there's so many questions in the chat. I want to thank you so much for being with us. Can we end on, I'm going to combine two questions.
Please, I can say I've got 5 more minutes if you've got.
Okay, we'll take a couple more then. One of the questions is, would you consider publishing a book about your son's poetry? And then another question is around, what do we say to convince people to vote this year?
Well, yes on number one. It's not all me. Tommy's got, my wife Sarah and sisters and tons of cousins and lots of people involved. But we're looking right now at those questions about how to publish different, essays and poems and everything. And the second question was
how do we convince somebody to participate and to vote this year?
Well, look, I tell the kids, the young people, this is Joe Biden's last presidential election as a politician. It's your first presidential election. Okay. So yeah, maybe you're not going to get everything you want. You might not get 100%, but you can get 80 or 90% of what you want. And more importantly, you can make a difference in terms of where we're going and where we're heading in the future. So we need them more involved now than ever before. And that's what Democracy Summer is all about. So tell them about Democracy Summer. They can check it out. We need the young people engaged, and we've got a lot to teach them, and we got a lot to learn from them too.
Great. Oh, there's a question about foreign contributions and the emoluments clause.
Yes.
So do you want to take a crack at that one?
Well, I didn't see the specific question, but the Democrats on the Oversight Committee, where I'm the lead Democrat, we released a report called White House for Sale about $8 million that we were able to document that Donald Trump pocketed during his presidency. That is, I hasten to say, a tiny fraction of what he really took. And Nancy Pelosi was giving me a hard time saying $8 million. I mean, that, he could have gotten that in 1 month. And I'm like, yeah, but we have the documented receipts here, and he's not allowed to take $1 from a foreign government. So we're talking about documented receipts going from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Indonesia right to the Trump hotels and the restaurants and the other businesses. But yes, we only had records for 2 years out of 4 years. We only had records for 4 businesses out of 500 businesses that he had, and we only got the records for 20 countries. So there's a lot more out there. Undoubtedly, the Constitution says in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8, that nobody in federal office, including the president, shall receive a present, an emolument, which means a payment, an office or a title of any kind, whatever, says the Constitution, from a king, a prince, or a foreign state without the express permission of Congress, which of course he never got, in which he, didn't seek. And sometimes they'll say, well, we made voluntary payments for the profits that we got. Well, that just gives the game away. The Constitution doesn't say you can't keep the profits in money you take from foreign governments. It says you can't take money from foreign governments. So he gave $400,000 or $500,000 back, which just gives you a thumbnail sketch in corrupt Trump accounting terms of how many tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars he was pocketing. But look, what's on the ballot? Two different public philosophies. The Democratic public philosophy simply says the government must be an instrument for the common good of all, for the interests of all the people. And that's why we invest in infrastructure and reduce prescription drug prices and so on, versus the GOP Trump philosophy, which is the government is an instrument for the private wealth maximization of the guy who gets in office, private money making for him and his family and his companies. And that's just, the autocrat's playbook. So that's what we're up against, but it's not just for New Hampshire and it's not just for America. It's about democracy and freedom all over the world, because we're in a terribly frustrating situation right now where Trump, with Putin whispering in his ear, is exercising a veto power over clear bipartisan will to fund the people in Ukraine trying to resist Putin's filthy imperialist invasion. But every day, the Republicans are more and more deeply under the sway of Trump, and he's blockading any ability for us to go through. It's like he's the fourth branch of government, and Putin's the fifth branch of government, telling him what to do.
Susan asks, do you worry about the Electoral College in 2024?
Well, we're in a weird position because we got to play defense and offense, and it's like January 6, 2021. We've got to defend the Electoral College system, such as it is, against electoral fraud and violence, the kind that Donald Trump promoted against us in the state legislatures, against election officials like Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, against his own vice president, who he tried to coerce into stepping outside of his constitutional role, which is ministerial and administrative in nature, when the Congress is meeting in joint session on January 6th, and simply to declare that Trump was the president, or to kick the whole thing into the House of Representatives for a contingent election. So we got to defend the system as it actually exists against their constant efforts to commit fraud or violence. At the same time, we really have to move lawfully to get rid of the Electoral College system. I mean, it's 2024. We should be electing the president the way we elect senators and representatives and governors and mayors. Whoever gets the most votes wins. I mean, we've had 5 people become president of the United States who lost the popular vote twice in this century, in 2000 and in 2016. And we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars promoting democracy to foreign nations that are writing their own constitution or trying to develop democracy. And the one thing they never come back to us with is, that Electoral College thing you've got? That sounds really great. We think we'll import that to our country, right? So we've got to learn from our own experience, and we got to learn from what's taking place abroad. So check out the National Popular Vote interstate campaign. I was very proud that the National Popular Vote Compact was my very first bill that I introduced as a state senator in Maryland, in Annapolis, when I was there. So I guess I got to go. I'm sending love to all of you guys up in New Hampshire, in the Granite State. And thank you for hanging tough for democracy and for our freedom.
Thank you so much for being with us and for your wonderful book.